Evening and welcome to this week's Ask the Farmer Q&A session. My name is Bridget Barry and I work for Farming for Nature. So Farming for Nature was set up to inspire and encourage farmers that farm or wish to farm more with nature in mind. One of the ways we do this is each year we have the Farming for Nature Ambassador Awards. This is whereby we find exemplary farmers who are spokespersons for nature. And this Q&A session is a great way to learn more and ask your questions to these farmers. So I will kickstart the evening with asking some questions to our speaker tonight, and then we encourage you to write into your chat box any questions that you have for the speaker on his farming practices. So if you miss any of tonight's session, or you know anyone that has missed it as well, they can find it on our YouTube channel tomorrow. We'll have it up there and you can listen back to it. So onto tonight's event. We are delighted to have one of our more recent Farming for Nature ambassadors, tillage farmer Louis McAuley, join us from County Meath. Louis runs a 1,700 acre farm in County Meath, of which 1,400 of this is in cereal and made into feed for cattle, sheep and horses. He runs it alongside his family. Louis, welcome and thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Louis, you might just start with, I just want to say, it's great to profile a farm like yours, because I think one of the important things is that you did a massive U-turn about 6 years ago from being a highly intensive farm and kind of looking to move more into kind of, I suppose, regenerative farming, and what that has done for you and your business and your farm is what we're very interested to hear about tonight. But you might just set the scene for us. What's your farm look like? What would it even sound like in spring, late spring, early summer? What's it look like? How is the farming system set up?
Well, I suppose to be fairly simple about it, I kind of use this background I have for a previous talk I did last year, and well, in one sense I don't actually know how to change it, but also it's fairly useful to have for tonight, because in this picture here I'm sowing a crop of winter wheat, so it would have been probably late September, early October. I don't think it wasn't this year, it was a couple of years ago, but anyway, so basically that's the traditional, if you ever look through the Farmer's Journal or any other sort of your farming press, the image of sowing crops in the autumn is always maybe a plough and a power harrow, or a seed drill, kind of all working, maybe a lovely, or maybe a nice little picture of 3 or 4 tractors stuffed for their tea together or whatever. And while that was lovely, don't get me wrong, and I often was involved in those sort of scenes, what we're doing here is we're putting seeds in the ground, we're planting a crop, but that's kind of what we want our fields to look like when we're doing it. So instead of this brown sort of bare, fully inverted soil, we're trying to maintain kind of a living cover, living mulch in the soil, keep the soil covered throughout the year. So look, we can talk more detail later on, but so in this example here, in this picture, there would have been a crop of winter barley, say, harvested around the 20th of July for talk's sake, as usual. As soon as we get the straw baled off it, 10 years ago, even probably younger, when I was probably from the age of 12, I was just mad for ploughing, and any spare minute would spend ploughing during the summer, trying to, get ahead of things and make things easier for the autumn. But our approach now is, as soon as we get a field cut there, our field cleared of straw, we'll go and sow a cover crop in it. So and the scene, so sowing the cover crop will be that exact picture we have there, just without all the color. So it's the same machine, same tractor. We'll come along, we'll sow that cover crop. We like diversity, so we got mustard, phacelia, we try and get as many plant families, as many plant species, all within reason, and all that's going to kind of be cost effective and grow really quickly, to get us that scene in about 8 weeks time later. So we come back, and then we're coming back in then in 8 weeks time and sowing our crop into it. So that's I suppose that's kind of in that picture there is the extreme of our system change. Like that's the ultimate goal in how we are trying to farm. We'd love to sow every crop in that sort of condition there. Like so it's not to say it always happened, like, and that's, you know, different for different. Sometimes we'll be going in after beans, it'll just be a bare stubble, we'll be chasing the combine out the gate and it'll just be bean stubble, and then we'll go straight to wheat. Or oilseed rape, we won't put a cover crop in it, it'll just regenerate naturally, get some volunteers if the slugs don't eat them, and then we'll just go and sow the wheat in. Other times we'll be combining a bit later in the year, and we'll just to say, you know, there's no time to sow a cover crop, and it'll just be bare stubble we're sowing in. But in essence, we're like, you know, when I talk about regenerative no-till farming, this picture here behind me is the ultimate sort of, it's the prize win. And like, I suppose anytime we've sowed, like, you know, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions last year about how does it work and have you had any problems, but in a fairly general sense, anytime we sow into a big cover crop like this, you're nearly guaranteed it's going to work perfectly, because the soil is in such good condition from the crop that's in the ground, the cover crop, the drill, everything works so perfectly. And the crop, you know, we've had many problems over the year, but when we get the field into that kind of condition, there's almost never any problems. So that picture there is, I suppose, the ultimate for what we're trying to do.
So we might just step back a bit, and then we'll get more into the kind of technical stuff of it. But you yourself, what's your own kind of journey into agriculture and your journey with this farm?
I suppose I've just been on the farm from as soon as it was, I don't know about safe, but anyway, it was never unsafe. But, you know, as soon as I was able to come on a tractor, able to spend time on the farm, I've been on it. So I've been around this farm, as long as I can remember. So I went to college in England, did a degree in agriculture and mechanization, come back then on this farm when I was 21, I think, and I've been here since. So that's kind of that's kind of my kind of.
And you running it alongside brothers?
Yeah, so we've got there's kind of two generations. My father and his two brothers, and now it's kind of my two brothers and a cousin are kind of, so there's plenty of us involved in the family business, you know. So
about 6 years ago, you guys changed your methods a bit from kind of being intensive to not as intensive. So what was the pivot moment, Louis? Why?
Well, I actually was just thinking about this evening, and I think it goes back for me and for maybe someone, I don't know who else, but everyone has different. But in around 2014 was one harvest where everything looked really good. Crops were growing really well. And coming to harvest, like, they just didn't perform like they should, like you felt they should have for whatever reason. Like, so that was one kind of big thing will affect what's going on here. Also in that year, we had some other good crops, and like they still didn't make a whole lot of money, even though you were getting really good yields. So there was that. To go back before that, like growing up as a kid, I was always told, people would always talk about 1985 as a really wet harvest, and they had to put dual wheels in the combines and they were getting stuck. And like from the time I started driving combines, every second year it felt like we were getting stuck or getting. So like there was definitely, like, I kind of got a bit fed up of constant mucking at harvest and slogging through, you know, wet fields and that sort of thing. So that was another kind of thing. And then, yeah, look, it was that in around that 2014 harvest, there was a few, like we had a few disappointing crops, a few different things. And that's kind of when we started putting our toe in the water of growing cover crops.
And was it an advisor, or was it, you know, were you speaking to neighbours, or was there something that?
There was a couple of the guys who would have started base. I'd been speaking to Robbie Byrne and a couple of others, you know, loosely around that time about the ideas of cover crops. Also around that time, like I probably joined Twitter, and I started seeing a couple of the English farmers, maybe I think Jake Freestone and Tom Sewell, and I'd seen them sowing into the type of cover crop like what's behind me, and that kind of blew my mind a bit, like, because it was just kind of an eye-opening thing where they had gone in, come in after harvest, sown a cover crop, and were able to come back in then and drill their wheat into this kind of picture. So that kind of woke me up a bit to that kind of thing.
And did you go straight in, Louis, or did you kind of do a bit of your farm one year?
Oh, just a bit, yeah. So like
just to see how it went.
Yeah, like the first year we did one field we just put an oat cover crop into it, and then another field, and that went for spring beans then, and then another couple of fields. We actually hosted a demo for, it was Cooney Furlong Machinery Company. They were just kind of getting going at that, and they had the Vatersad agency, so they were demoing sort of Vatersad machinery, and we kind of used them as part of the demo. We established cover crops with them. So that was, so with those two kind of plots over winter, kind of like, so, and that was kind of like, once you start sowing a cover crop, you get out into the field, you're digging around, you're seeing worms. Now, I don't know, I honestly think some of the stuff we see when we start looking was probably always there, but when we're kind of looking more, so we feel you just kind of get hooked on it. And then kind of in the spring, then we bought just a simple tine drill, a direct drill, a Claydon, just so that we could sow into those cover crops. So we ended up with some spring beans and some spring oats, sort of direct drilled. And that was kind of our first kind of proper giving it a go ourselves. Like we had, and kind of the key whole part of this whole thing too is like, over the years, I say maybe 2 years previous to that, we had a couple of sort of demonstration of like a drill, you know, a machinery company would have a drill, maybe a Claydon, and we just come in and try and do strip till, just try direct drilling. But it would have been sort of in a continuous situation. It would have been a kind of, I watched in around that time, I also went and saw Gary Zimmer do a talk. I think it was in Navan, okay? And Gary Zimmer, for anyone, I'm sure there's plenty of people have read him. He's a bit of a lunatic, but he's an excellent presenter, a really interesting guy, and he talks a million miles an hour, but he's just really good to listen to. But one of the things, his big thing was, if you want to do something without doing something, you have to earn the right. So if you want to sow your crop, if you want to grow your crops without cultivation, you have to earn the right to do so. If you want to grow your crops without fertilizer, you have to earn the right to do so, and etc. etc. So
what do you mean by that? Sorry, yeah.
So previous to that, like our attempts at direct drilling were just, you know, going into the field where we'd previously ploughed and just tried direct drilling. So with the crop we were going to grow anyway, in the same rotation, in the same, and not changing anything else. Whereas what Gary Zimmer meant was, what are you going to do to replace the function that the cultivation was doing? So for us, cultivation was, it was conditioning the soil, it was, you know, managing weeds, it was probably creating a little bit of just starter nutrition for the plant by mineralizing nitrogen. So we had to look at all those things and say, how, okay, we're gonna take those away from those seeds we're planting. So what are we going to do instead of that? So the cover crop is kind of the big thing in that. So the cover crop, like in the picture behind me, it'll create kind of nutrition. It'll put roots down into the soil and condition it and loosen it up and allow the next crop to grow easier. So that's the kind of I mean by earning the right. And then when you add to that, we'll say, you know, a good rotation, so that you're following a break crop, you're not growing continuous cereals all the time. That was the kind of cover crops and a much improved rotation were the two things that really kind of, you know, took our attempts at direct drilling or our direct drilling crops from being a bit like, you know, scabby and not looking so great to being actually looking quite nice and, you know, holding their own in terms of performance as well. So
like if you were a conventional farmer, a neighbour of yours looking over the fence and you're like, as well, these lads at, they're kind of constantly putting in crops like your cover crops and stuff. I mean, you could say it's a lot harder work maybe than just kind of leaving it fallow for, you know, leaving it brown for a while or plowing it for a while, or what. But you were starting to see results presumably in your cash crops.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you could say it's a lot more work, but like that machine behind can do maybe 80 acres, 90 acres a day, no problem with one man. Whereas to go and sow that with, you'd probably need 4 men to do that in one day. So yes, you're sowing it twice, but the overall time and cost of doing it is so much less in the whole scheme of things. One man gave me a laugh one day. I was out the field, I was sowing with this machine, and he stopped. He was inquiring. He's a fellow farmer. He pulled me over and he was like, he had to get out and see what I was doing. And anyway, I told him what he was doing. He thought, oh, that sounds good, yeah. But then his biggest statement at the end was, I wouldn't have time for all this. I have too much plowing to do. I wouldn't have time for this. So I said, fair enough.
A slow converter.
Yeah.
So you're no-till or min-till?
No-till.
You're no-till. Okay.
So I say, okay, before anyone gets any distance, like we're not 100% no-till. We still have a plow. We still have our one pass. So we're not 100%. We are heading it close. This has been we're probably over 90% now for harvest 22, which is the highest we've got to. Suppose when we start our first year, when we actually had our own drill, we probably went into 40-50%, and we kind of have tried to creep it up ever since. So sorry, what did you ask me?
Oh, are you no-till or min-till? And
oh,
you
yeah,
just saying it.
min-till.
Yeah.
So again, another thing on that is in maybe around the turn of the year 2000, 2001, we did try a little bit in min-till. Okay, so whereas we did a bit of cultivating instead of ploughing, and then just tried to come in and sow it. And I suppose we had an okay result the first year, and so not too bad. But I suppose we weren't seeing much huge. We were seeing some improvements in our soil, but we were very vulnerable to like wet weather, and it wasn't. So to cut short to the chase, I can't make no-till work, or I can't min-till on our farm for what we're trying to do. I just find it very hard to implement it, because when you cultivate the soil shallow, you create these small soil particles, and you're so vulnerable to wet weather and compaction in that surface. Whereas what we're trying to do with no-till is leave whatever structure is there intact, so that like all we're just doing is placing the seed in and hoping we have enough structure there. So yeah, so it's I kind of.
Would you say that your crops are more weather resilient now than they were pre 6 years ago, or pre?
Yeah, it's to some extent, like, so generally
like we had a very hot summer last summer.
Yeah,
we had a very wet one the year before. Like, would you see resilience in your crops?
Generally speaking, if we get a dry spell, we'll say around the end of May, June, when wheat is really growing on, like generally our crops of wheat will hold their color a little better than or say any fields we've direct drilled will or no-till will have a better color than ones we plowed. Like, okay, it's not miraculous. Like a couple of years ago when there was a drought, let me say for the first week of the drought, the direct drill fields looked a lot better. But by the time the drought continued on, everything was kind of gone. It had caught up. But so there is definitely a bit more health and stuff in them, certainly. Like then on the other hand, our soils are more resilient to wet weather in that we won't get erosion. They'll be much better able to carry machinery. We don't get ruts. Like our tram lines in the spring are always, we don't have deep tram lines. We don't get stuck around like that. But the big vulnerability with our system is if we get absolutely washed out of it straight after we sow or we plant the seeds, that's when it can get a bit hairy. And I think it was often 2019 we struggled kind of big time. We had plenty of issues that year, with just like crazy rain straight after. Like so, now look at in that saying that, like the longer the fields that were in the system longer, when we're in better condition, dealt with it better. I think the worst ones were the ones kind of that were 1 or 2 years into the system. They kind of struggle a bit, but kind of like the weather is wet weather after planting. We're still a little bit vulnerable to that in our system for sure.
And sorry if this is an obvious question, it's just that I don't know. When you're doing your kind of cover crop rotations, like, is there kind of a manual start here, do this one next year, like, or
So
how do you know which ones to put down, or?
kind of what we kind of have sort of in our rotation, right? We have kind of, as break crops, we have oats, beans, and rape, oilseed rape. So we'll be growing those, and in between them, we'll put in our wheat and our barleys. So what we kind of always do as a matter of course is we'll sow a cover crop of oats ahead of our beans. So that'll be sown in the spring. So that's kind of one thing we always do. So we'll always put an oat cover crop before beans, because we just found over the years it has worked pretty well. And the like of that cover crop behind me in the picture, that's something we'll try and sow after winter barley, where we can get in early and get a good bit of growth. So it's kind of, we just kind of just fit, look, we'll just try and squeeze a cover crop in where we can, I suppose. And that's kind of what.
And do you test your soil? Have you seen much improvement, or like, have you done soil tests and measurements, or not really?
Well, we don't know. Like, we obviously test sort of chemicals sort of in the soil, as in for NPK, kind of what we have to do. We haven't done any major sort of carbon or organic matter testing. I suppose we could just say it's fairly obvious when we look ourselves and dig into those fields. There's a big difference in, like, the fields we have a longer term in no-till. Just dig and look a lot better than the shorter term ones, I suppose.
And when you've got your kind of cash crops done, do you still leave strips within them, or is that not not really?
You say within the field, like?
Yeah.
Not really, no. That's something that we haven't got down that road yet. No.
Okay. No. So would your inputs be the same as, say, a neighboring tillage farmer, or would they be different, do you think?
It's kind of a good question. I suppose chemical wise, we obviously are reliant on herbicides, you could say, more so than because we're not plowing, we're not burying weeds. So we kind of have to, we will, it's kind of a two-edged coin, because obviously when you cultivate to sow, what your standard practice is, you will germinate a set of weeds, but we tend to be dealing with a different set of weeds, which kind of are more perennial kind of things. So I don't think we're a whole lot different. We're not using a whole lot more or less chemicals than a conventional farmer, I suppose, but I think they're probably, no, it's probably about the same, really. On other inputs, like we're probably trying to kind of cut our nitrogen use a little bit over time. We wouldn't be on the high end of things. But, like, I suppose being kind of only sort of, some of our fields are only 4 and 5 years into the system, we're kind of, and we have to be careful that we don't, like, sacrifice too much yield, and we kind of need to, we're trying to push our crops and be as productive as we can. Like, so, like, our main reduction of what a conventional farmer would be on diesel and sort of wearing metal and time spent sowing crops. After the crop is sowed, it's not a whole lot different to kind of conventional management, I suppose.
And you've seen a difference in your soil, I presume? Yeah.
No, definitely. Like, kind of, if we go back to that 2019 example, when our system, we were struggling to establish crops, and we got some crops sown, and some grew good, some grew bad, and some were complete failure. But as time went on, then we were also we had our plow and our one pass going, partly because we planned to do some anyway that way, and partly because we needed to get some crops in the ground. So we were what we found that year, like complete night and day, was that year was really wet. Even for the plow with the conventional system, it was a struggle. But what we did find was, if we went to a field where we had been no-till for 3 or 4 years, we could work there and do really good work because the soil was in fantastic condition. If we went across the hedge to a field that had just been farmed conventionally and ploughed to that point, we couldn't work. It was so, for us, kind of, it was as if like we had been, by farming it in that way, it was like we were putting something in. It was like a bank account or deposit account. We were kind of accumulating something in it every year by farming it in that way. And it was kind of, it allowed us then to cash it in, and that, and it was, but it was a huge, it completely was like, it was huge evidence, would say, that by our farming methods in the previous few years had completely changed the soil, in that, we were actually able to get in and sow a crop because it had so much more structure and, I suppose, organic matter and life in the soil. So,
and on that, like, have you seen nature, aside from kind of worms and stuff, have you seen other evidence of nature responding to your changes?
Yeah, well, I suppose our insecticide, like, as soon as we kind of went down this route of farming, like we were, and probably from a little bit before that, like we were trying to reduce our insecticide use on the farm, like as much as we could. And again, like last year, we didn't use any. This year, I think we haven't used any either. And like for previous couple of years, it was quite low too. So we are, where before we would have had, big problems with barley, BYDV and stuff like that, it seems like there is a kind of a natural solution or a natural sort of habitat management coming along there, whereas aphids aren't allowed to cause havoc like they would have done, that there seems to be a bit more of a balance there. Look, I'm terrible with birds and identifying birds and seeing, and like, it's probably disgraced that I don't, because I know, but I do know, looking around, that there's loads of birds, different birds, small birds, certainly, because, and we, like, it got, like, without, like, there is much more of a habitat for birds in our fields, because, that field, say in the one behind it I'm sowing in the picture, like, that'll break down, and like, even by a few months later, there will still be the residue and cover there for birds and other creatures to kind of live in. So, look, it's to my shame that I don't have any kind of numbers or actual data on it, but definitely our farm as a habitat has certainly improved by farming this way.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What's the proudest thing? What's the thing you're most proud of? Sorry, in terms of changing to this type of farming.
I just think it's that, like, the idea of improving our farm year on year, as evident by that time when we ploughed up some that had been ploughed and it was in much better condition, as evident by, our yields going kind of in the right direction, and say evidenced by the harvest just gone, like our no-till fields kind of out yielding some of the ploughed fields. So that's sort of being able to farm in a way that's improving our soil, the habitats, our environment. So whatever, it's kind of hard to, like, it's very hard to pick a word. So what are we improving? It's our soil, it's kind of our place. It's whatever we're kind of in, I say we don't control it, but we're kind of charged with managing this kind of whatever acres, whatever fields we are kind of working, improving the soil quality in those fields, while maintaining good, productive agriculture in them. There's nobody kind of paying us to do this. There's nobody, like, this is not subsidized. It's not like we've done all this, but yeah, we've had a big handout to do it, or we signed up to a scheme and we're paid to do it. Or it's not like we're growing half the yields, but we're getting, a higher price for it. It's still just very, kind of, it's basically conventional farming, but we are improving things going along. We're regenerating the soil rather than degrading it. And like, that's kind of huge for me.
And you're selling direct to your customer as well, aren't you? Kind of cattle feed. So, I mean, are you able to kind of do you ask for a premium within your product because
No.
of, or?
Not currently, no. There's no, I mean, like we are, but like it's you know, it's something. If a market arises, like we could, use grain, or other local growers might decide to farm this way, and we could create a kind of a pool of this kind of, of raw materials to put into sort of a ration and that was farmed in a certain way. But currently it just goes into the mill as, look at, maybe some of our customers know how we're farming, maybe it helps us some way in our kind of PR or whatever. Who knows, but currently
is the product more nutrient dense or anything?
Look, I couldn't say on that.
Okay.
I wouldn't, I mean, I'm wary of claims about nutrient density, because, and I would have been one of the worst kind of, when I going into this journey, I would have been throwing that around, that idea of nutrient density, and just because I'm going to farm this way, our food is going to be so much better. Maybe it is, I think there definitely needs to be work done on it, but I haven't seen much evidence to say one way or another, that it is better. So look, maybe it is, but I'm happy, to be honest, I'm happy with it being just as good, but not kind of destroying the place in the farming process, and actually improving kind of the land and the kind of.
I have a few questions coming in there now, Louis, so I'll just ask them. So Tom Tierney asks, what's Louis's next step in his biological journey beyond covers and grazing covers? What's your next step?
Oh, I don't really have a next step. I mean, what I'd like to build in more consistency into our yields. So the last 2 years have been pretty good. And I'm kind of flying high in our system at the minute. And I am always wary that we're going to get like a wet autumn season that kind of makes planting really difficult. And like that's kind of, so consistency, improved consistency in our system is kind of what I would like. Like maybe, yes, with fertilizer prices where they are, we probably should look at reducing our fertilizer use. Be honest, I'm probably lazy in that regard. That, well, I think I kind of feel like I've done great work in sowing the crops in this way, and that we'll just farm it normally kind of for the rest of it. And I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily think that that's a wrong approach, because we are trying to be productive and we're trying to kind of maintain yields and keep going that way. So look, I'd hope we should probably try kind of looking at our inputs. Like I am conscious all the time that our system is very reliant on glyphosate, and I just really wish someone would invent another product that did the same thing, that even if we could just use it half the time and swap between the two, or like, and like I'm not hugely afraid that it's a harmful product, because when I look at the fields, we use it once a year to terminate that cover crop, to kill off a weed that's, established weeds, volunteers. But when I look in those fields, like the soil health in those fields is improving year on year. Like glyphosate is not holding back our soil health. So, but like, you don't like to think you're going to be reliant on one chemical, one product for the rest of your farming. So when I just hope that if this type of farming, and it is deemed, it seems to like deliver big benefits for the environment, for soil, that like kind of more emphasis can be put into helping farmers, by creating, other products that will help them, alternatives to glyphosate, I suppose, just to kind of take the heat off one product, because and it's not that I'm afraid of using it, or I think, but when you're reliant on one thing, it's not the best place to be. But
yeah. Kate Rochford asks, hi, we're wondering, does Louis find that growing catch crops and using min or no-till result in the use of increased amount of herbicides?
No, well, like as I said, our herbicide program in most crops is is probably, like, I wouldn't think we're probably lower. So say if you forget about the glyphosate, before sowing, the rest of our season, we're probably on par with conventional. Like, so in some fields we'll have to spray more because we'll run into a problem. In other fields we'll get away with less. Like, for example, sometimes when you sow beans in the spring into a cultivated soil, you kind of encourage a lot of other weeds to grow, and you kind of have problems that way. But whereas we sow them into like an oat kind of mulch, it covers the whole soil, and our weed pressure is usually a little lower. So it's kind of, that cancels each other out. Like, obviously, glyphosate before sowing, it's essential for us. It's not necessarily essential for people that are ploughing. Having said that, I think most fields in the country, like 3/4 of them, probably get sprayed with glyphosate anyway, even when people are ploughing. So like our use of glyphosate or other herbicides is not any, overall any different than a normal farmer.
So Lucy Sheelan asks, what do you think is stopping his neighbours or fellow farmers from following the example? Is it just the time issue, or would subsidies and a payment scheme help as an incentive, do you think?
The subsidies, like an incentive, like financial incentives, unless they are huge, they're not going to work. They're not going to encourage, like, because I suppose the penalty for getting it wrong in this can be hundreds of euro per acre. So unless your whatever subsidy is going to kind of make up for that, it's not going to be the thing that convinces people to do it, I don't believe. So why don't more people, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm sure they drive around sometimes and they'll see we've had a bad crop here and there, and I'm sure that puts them off. I'm sure, like,
is there much knowledge sharing, or, is there, I mean, as a concept, is there many people doing it? Is it?
Yeah, well, like, I mean,
is it kind of out there?
It's quite widely talked about, I suppose, on different, like, Teagasc wouldn't, like, if we're going to look at Teagasc, like, they don't really have kind of this sort of farming showcase, really. Like, they are scratching at the edges. They are kind of, but it's not really promoted as a kind of bulletproof mainstream approach to farming. It's kind of, they're having a look at it, and look, that will come in time, but at the minute it's not. Like, it is, for me, it's kind of, it's a very, natural and logical approach to farming, but there's, like, quite a few things have to change. You can't really, like, just your day-to-day management of fields and, like, how you mine them kind of has to be really kind of top notch, because when you're going to come and plow it, you can kind of get away with a lot of things. But when you're just going to come back in with your seed drill and put seed back in the ground, you have to be really careful not to do any harm in the meantime. And that's where a lot of people will fall down, I think, in how in that between harvesting a crop and going with the next one, whether it's gathering up straw, on a wet morning or something like that, things like that you just can't really do in this system. And, like, there's patience as well. I mean, it can be hard. Like, if you try doing direct drill and no-till in a wet year, you'll get a bad result, and that can be very tough on your confidence, and you'll say, like, forget this, just not worth the hassle. So, like, sometimes you need a bit of patience to get the rewards. So
fair enough. Nigel Burke asks, what yield penalty is Louis finding in switching to biological farming? What preparation should a person do to switch to direct drilling in both a continuous tillage situation and a long-term lay situation?
The yield penalty, it's very, I can't put a figure on it. I really can't put a number on it. Maybe if I went back and averaged over the years, maybe I could, but a yield penalty, like, we have had various different successes and various different failures over the years. Sometimes year one we'll just hit it right and we won't have any yield failure, or yield loss. Other times, maybe in year 3 we'll hit a bit of a yield dip. What I generally have found over this period of time, when we look at averages, and we've had some yield drops here and there, we've had some kind of yield bumps to kind of make up for it, but we've also kind of, when we look at the margin or costs of of production and what we're actually left with in the end, it generally doesn't we're not at any financial loss for doing it, I suppose. We'll say in a 5-year period. Like, and that's the only way you can look at, because if you just try and convert 1 year and you hit a bad year, well, on that single year data, yeah, you've had a big loss, but it's probably not a fair representation. So,
but your soil is better, you're using less diesel, and like essentially your crops may or may not be healthier, you'd hope, kind of.
Yeah. So I suppose, to put it simply, okay, if you wanted to get into this, if you want to go and look around, go and talk to people, go and figure out, make a plan of what you're doing. And if you just went and did it and were committed to it and kind of didn't do anything wild and kind of stuck to some of the kind of rules, and in 5 years' time, you would probably be happy that your farm has improved. You've had a few ups and a few downs, but you're in a much better place in terms of your soil health, soil structure, and financially you're probably on par with where you would have been if you hadn't done it. And then you're kind of hoping, and what we're probably seeing now is in that second 5 years, like our fields that are in that second 5 years now, in the harvest just gone, like those, we out yielded our ploughed fields. So like we've actually, in this previous harvest, we've harvested fields grown in a kind of no-till system that out yielded fields that were ploughed. So, that's kind of enough to say. And like, it's very hard to tell someone that, because they'll have a different experience and then they'll be like, you said this and you said that. But without looking too hard into the data, that's kind of what we've seen now at this stage, is that we are seeing in this long-term system, we can match and actually go above yield. Like, we have a field of wheat beside the yard here. Look, it was one field that we ploughed and sowed conventionally, and it looked $1 million all year. I think everybody I talked to everybody was kind of said, geez, Louis, you're going to be under pressure when you go and harvest that. You're going to have to, you'll be going back ploughing after you cut that, because, it's going to do the business. And actually today it was cut. I had about 5 different people phone me to actually find out what it did. It actually ended up doing maybe 0.4 of a ton less than a field across the road that had been direct drilled, even though it looked so much better. So I think at that stage now, that's when we're seeing the soil health actually delivering for the plant. So that's kind of where we're testing the limits of where a conventionally farmed crop can deliver, where we can sort of bring our chemical nitrogen fertilizer and our sprayer, and what we can bring, what we can actually put on the field to make it grow a good crop. We seem to maybe be hitting the limit with that, and have shown that we can, with good soil health and structure, we can actually deliver for the plant much better. So look, again, like, this is one harvest, so I'm not going to.
I'll come back to you in 10 years' time.
Yeah. It's certainly reassuring, and it's a lovely thing to, it's kind of nice reward for kind of perseverance to see that kind of thing happen.
So Chris asked, do you have your drill set up any differently to direct drill winter small grains into these cover crops? No, not really. I'll kind of, on a technical level, for people that are familiar with seed drills, or just, it's a John Deere drill we have, like, although it looks like a huge amount of organic matter and biomass I'm sowing into, as the drill goes along the ground, that's being crushed down into like a few millimeters probably. So it in terms of placing the seed into the ground, it makes no difference really. And like that particular drill, that John Deere, or in general, most single disc drills are very well equipped to drill into that sort of thing. So it's not a big issue at all. Okay. Albert Reuter has asked, is there much problem with damping off by sowing into mulch? No. Sorry, this is real quick fire questions here, Louis. Well, damping off, to my mind, is seed kind of rotting out a bit. Maybe I could be wrong on that. Again, I'm not very technical.
you think I'd be better educated. But anyway, I think damping off means kind of damping and rotting out. No, if we sow into that big mush, like keep pointing this way, but it's actually this way behind me. If we sow into that, generally speaking, all is good because there's huge biological life and sort of structure, and there's drainage channels and everything. So the seed is happy out. Where we will get damping off or rotting out or complete just horror show sometimes is if it's normally like a bare stubble field, maybe when we're probably a second wheat is like the worst. If we try and sow that, maybe conditions are marginal to start with, and then we get really heavy rain after it, the slot, because we've smeared it, probably putting the seed in the ground, then just becomes a kind of just a pool of yuckiness. And that is where we can kind of struggle. And 2019 autumn, there was a few really uncomfortable kind of drives around looking at crops, but we got through it.
Yeah, fair enough. Claire Lyons has put all Oxford Real Farming Talks from the last 2 years and now on their YouTube channel if people want to see that. Neil Keane has asked, is grazing the most preferable way to recycle cover crops, or does rolling, etc., achieve the same objective?
Yeah, we don't really graze as a matter of course. A couple of years ago, we did some grazing of oat cover crops. Just happened to, we had big ones, and we also ended up grazing some very forward winter wheat. But it was just kind of, I suppose, opportunistic, and we kind of haven't done it since. And I'm not in a huge rush to go back to grazing cover crops because while it has its benefits for sure. Like I just find on our soils, we're quite heavy here. We're quite vulnerable to kind of rainfall, and sometimes the sheep, even though they're only sheep, they'll cause a little bit of surface compaction, and it'll just set us back a little bit. But in terms of recycling the cover crop, like when we run that drill through the field, it's like you rolled it. Like, so it's kind of on the ground, and the soil, the worms will recycle it as good as it.
Okay. Fergal Watson asks, given your experience, does a farmer need to use cover crops for a couple of years to condition the soil before switching to no-till?
It can help. And look, at people in base will fight with me till the cows come home with this different, and everyone has a different opinion. Like some people are big into kind of preparing their soils for no-till, or like doing different things, getting ready. Like, and I just find all I hear when they say it is like you're cultivating your soils to get them ready for no-till. And I just struggle with that concept, and I just find it's very hard to get it to work. So for me, it's just get in, make a plan with a good rotation is the biggest thing. Grow some good cover crops like in the picture behind me, and then just kind of get in and do it, because kind of if you try and have a transition period to no-till, you still will have some of the problems, some of the kind of wet weather, bad crops, different things. You might also have to buy a different set of machinery. So I'm kind of more a believer in if you have a good rotation and get cover crops in where they should be, you're best to just nearly just go straight in with one machine. That's kind of, and not have a transition period really.
Fair enough. Susan O'Brien has asked, hi Louis, what cover crops are you sowing into for cereals? Also, have you noticed a change in the weed profile amongst the cereal crops since moving to Mintel?
What cover crop? So that cover crop, generally what we sow in our summer cover crop, so that's kind of anything after harvest, sort of from the middle of July to like the middle of August. It's a mustard, phacelia, clovers, vetch, linseed, buckwheat, maybe some sunflowers, that sort of thing. That's one type of cover crop, and then our other cover crop is usually kind of oats or oats plus something else, but it's mainly oats, and that's what we put ahead of our beans, kind of to in weeds. Yeah, like I didn't know what willow herb was before we started this, and now it's just it is a pain in the hole. But look, we're kind of, it's always there. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's not. So that's kind of there. sterile brome, we have to be very careful with, because once you're not plowing, your whatever weeds you have when you're combining, they're the weeds you're going to have in your next crop. So you just have to be much more mindful of what weeds you have. Are you putting them through the combine? Are you spreading them? What options do you have in the next crop? Is it a spring crop or a winter crop? So we're just we're not, weeds have not gone riot by any means. We're fine. There's no big problem, but we're just an awful lot more conscious and mindful, I suppose, of what weeds we have and how careful we are not to spread them. We have another thing. We seem to every year find a new weed, like just someone throws a new weed at us, and so last year we found this rat's tail fescue, which I think is not too easy to kill. So hopefully that's not going to be a problem. But weeds are always there in the background. So far we're managing okay without, it's not causing any problems. But again, the weeds is as much your rotation and your hygiene really as it is your cultivation system.
Mm-hmm. Michael Costello has asked, has Teagasc advice been helpful in making your transition? I
think Michael knows what he's asking there, all right. But anyway, I don't think I need to answer that one for Michael.
Okay. Paul Myrna has asked, hi Louis, this coming year with very high fertilizer prices, Teagasc are advising to place fertilizer with the seed in the seed bed. Do you place your fertilizer in the seed bed, or what do you do?
Not really, no. We set that machine up in the picture to put on liquid fertilizer, and I did use it earlier on in there, mainly for oilseed rape or spring crops. But we're not growing a huge amount of spring crops. We do grow spring beans, but you can't put any nitrogen on them anyway. So I'm not. I don't find any benefit to putting any placed nitrogen or fertilizer with the crop. So that's it's no for me.
Claire Lawrence has said if anyone wants to join her on a similar type sessions in Canada, she's put up the links there for people. They can have a look at it and join the social media. So Nigel Burke has asked, how does Louis handle compaction without cultivation?
Well, I suppose in year one, if you're trying to convert to no-till and you've been ploughing, so you're going out to harvest a field that was ploughed previously, you really just have to kind of avoid compaction. So stick to your tram lines, be really, really careful. Okay, that's all I can say. Try not to go harvest when it's wet. That's when you're at your most vulnerable for compaction. After that, down 3, 4, 5 years in the line, you have to try really hard to cause compaction, because your ground carries you so much better because it has a structure. So it's a big thing at the start. If you're coming after a ploughed year, that's when you're vulnerable to compaction. But when you're in the system 5, 6, 7 years, even 3 or 4 years, your fields just carry you so much better. Like I mentioned earlier on, like I'm kind of scarred from my combining years earlier on of having dual wheels and getting stuck and just mucking and messing. And since in our no-till system, it doesn't happen. It's like, and we've seen that in a couple of harvests in recent times when it has been kind of wet. Our neighbours, or even we've been struggling on fields that were ploughed, but we go onto our no-till fields and it's just, happy days. So it's just a problem in the conversion. And it's like people say, this is the big thing. Cultivation doesn't cure compaction, it causes it, because it leaves the soil loose and then you're going to compact it again. So just stop cultivating the soil and then you'll stop getting compaction.
Enough. We're coming towards the end now, but Claire Lyons has also written, sorry for late tuning in, can Louis elaborate on the rotations used?
So if you want to say roughly speaking, it's kind of 8 years. So if we start in year one with oilseed rape, we'll then we'll have 2 winter cereals. So either winter wheat, winter barley, in either any combination. It could be 2 winter wheats, 2 winter barleys, or one of each. Then we will probably go for oats. Then we will have winter wheat again. Then we will have spring beans, and then we'll have another 2 cereals, either winter wheat or winter barley. So it's kind of 8 years. We'll always have a cover crop before our beans. We'll try always to get a cover crop after we've had winter barley, or after we've had winter oats, and that sort of. So we kind of have, you'd be hoping, 50% of the years you'd have a cover crop in a field.
Okay. So Louis, where do you, I mean, I know you're working alongside cousin and brothers and stuff, and I suppose, but there's a certain amount of kind of turning the steamship around and bringing everyone with you. Where would you get advice and support when looking at kind of progressing further down the biological farming route?
Look, the Base Ireland for me has been great. Like, that's kind of a great network for me to like, that was really kind of spurred me on, I suppose, in the early days. Me and whatever it was, 6, 7, or 8 other people formed Base Ireland around 2014, 15, wherever it was, as a means of kind of people that were all kind of wanted to get to, we all wanted to get to be farming like this kind of thing. And it was just a matter of being able to share ideas and experiences and successes and failures. So that's kind of, that has been the big thing for me.
So if people want to join Base Ireland, I mean, there's a website, obviously, and BAASE Base, and then you become a member, is it? And then
like we, it's kind of a WhatsApp group. We have a forum and different things. So it's, it's all just sharing. It's not highfalutin, replicated trial work, or it's farmer experience day to day. Like, what are you doing today? I think I might go sowing beans, and then someone else say, no, you're mad, it's too wet, don't, or vice versa. It's that kind of practical
on the ground,
especially for if you're just doing what you've always done, you don't really need to ask. You already, because you've done it before. But when you're trying to farm in a different way, and it's like, geez, I might go and sow into this cover crop tomorrow. Well, I've never done this before, so what should it look like? Because the first thing you'll do when you try and do something different is like, geez, does this look right? Does this not? So being able to take a picture, send it to kind of someone that's been down that road a couple of years ahead, or is maybe doing the same thing as you that day, that's kind of what you need in terms of building your confidence and steering you kind of to some sort of success in this.
Perfect. Well, Louis, I have to say thanks very much for joining us this evening. You've done a great job. It's lovely. Thanks for your generosity and sharing your knowledge and your journey, what you've done and how you've changed into this kind of type of farming. And hopefully you'll inspire other people to do so in order to improve their soil health and stuff. So thanks very much for that. So for anyone, just to let you know that this will be up on, this session will be up on YouTube, our YouTube channel tomorrow. So feel free to share it with anyone that wasn't able to attend today. Hopefully we'll have a farm walk later in the season, maybe in the summer on Louis' farm, or some other farms around that area, also tillage farmers. If you have any questions for any of our farmers, we have an online forum on our website, farmingfornature.ie, so feel free to stick up any question that you want on that. Our next Q&A session is with dairy farmer Thomas Stack in 2 Tuesdays' time, and that's on natural Korean farming. I was going to say North Korean farming, but it's actually natural Korean farming. So do register and join us for that. Meanwhile, thanks again, Louis. It's lovely. Do you know what's really nice, apart from obviously chatting to you and hearing your story, is just to be looking at sunshine for the last, your picture for the last hour. So thanks for that. But also thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge. So goodbye, everyone. And hopefully you'll join us again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks again, Louis. We'll chat to you soon.